Hello, this is Josh from the Narrate team. In the second part of Narrate's series, Add Value, Adam asks the question, how do we think about the resources generated by our vocation? And shares a narrative from the Bible that provokes thought on what we do with our resources.
So last week we started this conversation called Add Value, and we started just by saying, like, what if there's a couple questions that we work to get rid of from our approach towards life? We said, what if we stopped asking, like, what do you do for a job, or what's your dream job, or what do you do for a living? And what if we replaced those questions and the whole mindset that comes with it with a completely different question, and that's this question of what's your vocation? Vocation is something that I think our Catholic friends in particular have stewarded very well. It comes from the Latin word that means voice, and it speaks to something the Apostle Paul and many of the writers in the text talk about, and that is that it's not just about what do you get, but what do you give? And what vocation allows us to think about is, how am I made uniquely to serve people? And what we explored last week is, what if in your process and in your pursuit of serving people, what if it's okay if you make an income while you do that? Like, what if serving isn't just those of you who've worked so hard here already this morning, for example, to make this happen as volunteers? What if that's serving? But what if going to work tomorrow is also serving? And really the conversation is about motive and why you're doing that. So this morning, the next, in my mind, the next progression I want to take. Sorry, I just lost any sense of the English vocabulary there for just a second because my brain split in half. If you want to think more, parenthetically, if you really want to go like, okay, but I need to do more work on this vocation, there's a couple books on that mind map on the notes page that I would highly recommend. The top one being Tom Rath's Fully Charged, a great first glance at this whole conversation, if that's where you're at. This morning what I want to do is talk about, okay, so there's our vocation and the way that allows us to serve people. And then there's what we make because of our vocation. And I guess I want to shift the conversation toward, how do we use what we make and the resources and skills that we acquire to also serve people. So there's the actual work itself, and then there's the profit of that work. And how do we think about that? Now, my first instance in realizing that the way I think about that is rudimentary at best happened about 10 years ago. My friend Kyle and I were getting ready, kind of organizing our portion of a high school camp that we called Super Summer. We were in charge of the students who were incoming seniors and graduating seniors. There was about 100 of them. And we'd recently been to Israel together. And so that was inspiring because you learn lots there, but it's not in a museum. I mean, there's those tours too, but ours was like 10 miles a day of hiking and then sit down on this rock in 120 degrees and hear this 20-minute message and hold this actual thing, that kind of this rock or whatever. And so we wanted to take camp in our portion of camp and take people out of rows and students out of rows and out of like pole barns, and we wanted to put them into the mountains because we were in the Beartooth, some of the most beautiful mountains in the whole world. And one of the days we decided that we wanted to take the students to the metropolis known as Absorki, because that's the closest town. We wanted to load them in buses and vans and whatever we get our hands on to get 100 students back to Absorki, which I don't know is maybe 40 miles from this camp. And we wanted, as they got off the bus in their small groups, we wanted to hand them an envelope. And in the envelope, so we would say nothing about this, like, what are we doing? We're just not going to say anything at all. As they got off the bus or the van or whatever it was, we wanted to give them an envelope. And inside of it would just be a simple note, and we did all this, that just said, serve someone. Something like that. Like, how are you going to matter in Absorki today? Something along those lines. Very, the embryonic nature of Narrate was kind of coming out in this experience. And $50. So there was this challenge, this invitation, and then $50 cash, and really no direction. And we wanted to get them thinking about, how do we serve? Like, yeah, we serve at church, and those are important things, but there's also these things we can do with our own resource by identifying a need and just meeting it. We wanted to get them thinking about that. So the other thing that happened, though, is I understood that to take what was, I think, $500, I think what we did was $50. It might have even been $100. I've lost track and was too lazy to call Kyle this week and ask him. But whatever it was, rather than take that out of the budget, like I had a budget, but it just seemed a little kind of, like, I don't know, how are people going to feel about money they put in the offering plate going, to buy fried chicken? So rather than do that, I did something that I've forbidden the staff to do, and something that I think is really a bad precedent, and that is I went for some designated giving. Which means I sat down with a good friend of mine at the time, a guy who is this very astute entrepreneur in the most literal sense of the word. He started his own business when he was 18. He had bought and sold several. He was, quite honestly, one of the most affluent people I've ever known, but also very, very serious in his following of Jesus and his stewardship. I sat across from lunch with him, gave him all this, so kind of gave him that whole vision, and then said, but will you just give me the $500 to make the idea happen? Like, could I just do this end around? And again, like, it probably wasn't the smartest thing in the world, but will you just give it to me? He said, yeah. And then with the type of moxie you would expect from someone as successful as him, he said, but there's a right thing to do with the money, right? Like, of course there is, right? I mean, that's what you love about people like these and what makes you intimidated by them, because he has this very strong opinion. I said, okay, so what is it? And he said, oh, it's easy. He said, if I had a group, I'd take my $50, I'd walk to the nearest hardware store, I'd buy a box of outdoor garbage bags, as many shakes, rakes, and shovels as I could get my hands on. I'd start knocking on doors, and I'd say to people, hey, do you have flower beds or dog poop or any yard work that needs to be done? And before they could say how much, I'd say, and when we're done, you just pay us what you think it's worth, and we'll be on our way. And he smiled, and he said, because you know what would happen, right, Adam? I'm thinking, no, I don't. Like, you're completely outside of my comfort zone right now. He said, by the end of the day, my 50 would be hundreds. He said, just let us skip the rest of camp. End of a week, he said, I'll turn my 100, my 50 into thousands. He said, then I've got something to do some damage with. Now, I don't know what your response to that is, but mine was like wow, like that is so outside of my box and the way I would think. And that's kind of what I want to do this morning, is get us thinking not just about the work, but the profit that comes from the work. And listen, I get that means that you're kind of bummed you're here because this is a church and here I am with a microphone and here we go. So this morning, because we're going to talk a little bit about giving this morning, not to hear it necessarily. So let me just put a few cards on the table and maybe that'll relieve a little bit of tension for you. First card is, yeah, we're a church. Second card is, and I have a microphone, which you get to decide whether that makes me 1-800-BIG hair preacher or not. I can't control that and your response to that. The other thing is we are an organization that unapologetically exists financially because there's one input, and that's the bucket that just went by you a few minutes ago. That means that we unapologetically only exist, only serve people and God to the degree that people like yourself buy into the vision of what's happening here and so believe what God teaches in the text. So those are all facts. And to say that we're trying to hide that would be dishonest. Like, those are all facts. The other thing that's a fact is we continue to grow. We're up 13% in our attendance again this year, which means just the cost to serve people the way we want to continues to increase. But what makes church unique is, quite honestly, that just because someone comes in the door, that doesn't mean necessarily that giving follows. In fact, I think it was John Wesley who said the last thing to be converted is a person's pocketbook. So we get that generosity is a learned behavior. Another fact, we do not have a giant budget shortfall right now, and this isn't a covert way of asking you and twisting your arm. I'm not asking for your money this morning, okay? There are a couple principles that I want to explore this morning that I think, when leveraged, can dramatically increase the quality of your life. They're counterintuitive. In fact, I want to talk about two ideas this morning that I learned when I was 20 years old. And quite honestly, you know how many books I plagiarized. You know how many sermons I listened to. I have never heard these two ideas anywhere outside of this one person who taught them to me when I was 20 years old. Never heard them. So I say all that to say, if you decide over the course of this morning, I'm slimy, you don't like it, that's fine. Please don't throw the principles out. Throw me out, throw this place out, find a church you do trust, an organization that's trying to serve people that you do believe in, and leverage it there. But please don't disqualify the principles because I'm the one up here delivering them. You get to decide that part. The principles hold their own value. What I want to do this morning is get you thinking about, how do you think about the income that you receive because of your work? And I want to do it by looking at one of the most awkward, scandalous, like weird, I can't believe that's in the Bible, that's so embarrassing, like who are these people? Like, are you sure that's in there? Like, it is the strangest story. In fact, the middle schoolers are coming back from a ski retreat. They'll be at the 11:30. This is going to be the most awkward text we could ever pick when they're here. You'll understand in a minute, but you might want to come back to the 11:30 and just watch the 11:30 and watch how the middle schoolers respond to a couple verses we're going to read, because they're just weird. The story that we're going to read, it comes from the book of TMZ. You find it like after Globe magazine. It's on that little aisle at the end of the grocery store. Like it's whatever like slutty magazine you like to read, like it's in the same section. This story's unbelievable. It's actually from Genesis 38. It's about a woman named Tamar and her father-in-law, Judah. So let's just kind of jump into the story, because I've been laughing all weekend. Like, I can't believe, like, I've never set out to teach this text, but I'm pretty sure I'm in pretty elite company this morning as we unpack this text and actually do it innocently, because I wasn't like, I want to teach this. What could we teach from it? It's here. It's just, anyway, here we go. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hirah. Now, stop reading ahead. Okay, because you don't want to ruin it just yet. So let's just kind of orientate ourselves to Judah, because Judah, what the text is assuming is that you have some familiarity with this cat named Judah, but you do, or if you're like me, you forgot until this week, and so let me just kind of bring you up to speed. Judah is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. One of the 12 tribes of Israel gets named after Judah. Judah is a part of 12 brothers. And just to kind of give, so there's some character background information, like when you do the background check on Judah, here's the stuff that comes up. Judah, several years ago when he was growing up, he and his brothers, they had this dynamic because one of their brothers was a guy named Joseph, and he was the daddy's boy. He was the mama's boy. He was the golden child. He got straight A's, and everything he tried he was good at, and his brothers hated him for it. In fact, his dad played favorites with Joseph. Not Judah, like this is Judah's brother, Joseph, younger brother, mind you. So his dad wasn't very tactful, and Joseph wasn't very tactful. Joseph would have these dreams about all these great things he was going to do with his life, and then while they were sitting around the table in the morning eating Cheerios, they'd go, hey, guess what dream I had? You're going to bow down to me when I'm older. Like that kind of stuff. So they hated him. So one day his brothers are walking home from school together, and they're making their way back to Jacob, and they just go like, we've had it. Let's just kill Joseph. And they all kind of like, oh yeah, he's not here. Like, great idea. Let's just kill the guy. Like, we need some money for bubblegum anyway. Like, let's just get rid of him. Like, let's do something here. And so they decide they're going to kill him. Actually, the bubblegum thing is, I said that prematurely, because actually what happens is as they're walking, they decide they're going to kill him. They kind of put him in a little square cage until they're ready to finally do something with him. And then this is who Judah is. Judah shows up, and Judah says, tell you what, let's not just kill him. Like, let's profit from it. Like, let's sell him into human trafficking. Like, let's do that, because then we'll have some money for bubblegum. And they'll go like, wow, you're a genius. We want to get rid of him. We can even make money off of getting rid of him. So they do that. They sell him into human trafficking. And then Judah goes back to his dad, and his dad bought him this like Super Bowl 50 leather jacket, you know, like one of those really tacky ones that was just his prized possession. And he covers it with blood, because Joseph had this really nice coat. And Judah takes a corner of it, covers it with blood, goes back to his dad, and he says these very important words. They'll come up again. He says to his dad, Haker nah, recognize this. And he feeds his dad the story that Joseph had been murdered or killed by wild animals or something to that effect. And Jacob would spend the next 20 years of his life believing that his son had been killed innocently when in fact his own other son sold him into slavery. That's Judah. That's the character of this guy. So we keep going. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her. In case you're wondering what happens next, he made love to her. And then, if you're wondering what happens next, she became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named So this is fun material we're sliding through. The thing that the text wants you to see here is that she was a Canaanite. That's like country music star marries death metal drummer. It's like Bronco fan marries Raiders fan, something that, like, you don't do that. You just don't do that. Canaanites, these people sacrificed babies to their gods. Like, they weren't supposed to marry outside the tribe, Israel, let alone a Canaanite. So you see, there's a trend here in Judah's life and character. She conceived, again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Onan. You also don't do that. You don't name your son Onan. Just kidding. Sorry if your name's Onan. I've never known an Onan, have you? Or I think it's because of this story, because you're about to find out. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezeb that she gave birth to him. Now, Judah decides it's time for to have a son. So Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Tamar, we find out, it was also a Canaanite woman. And if you want to do some more reading when you're done here, Tamar and Judah both end up in Jesus' genealogy, which makes no sense until you take this story to its end. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Done. Like, you just love, like, Al Capone showed up, and boom, Er's gone. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring to your brother. Now, there's a dynamic here. It has a cultural ramification. It's called the Levirate marriage. This isn't just a Jewish thing. This is a Middle Eastern culture thing. And the idea was this: in a world where you picked most of the time one son, oftentimes your oldest son, to leave your inheritance to, the law of the Levirate said if the oldest brother died, was married and died and had no sons, then the next brother in line, I tell you, this is so crazy. The next brother was obligated by culture to marry the widow and see to it that she had a son, and then that son actually belonged to the dead brother. Now, the reason that's important is because, again, inheritance here, it didn't get split 3 ways in most cases. It went one way, and it often went to the oldest. So the second son has an incredibly difficult decision to make. Do you see the dynamic here? Older brother's dead. The ranch is now the second brother's. But if the second brother does what their culture said they had to do, what they ought to do, then in fact it's not his, because he's gonna bring his wife's widow into his house. He's gonna make sure she has a baby, and then what was supposed to be his older brother's is gonna become his. Do you see the dynamic here? This is all about resource. So, and here's the awkward, like, junior hire. And then the junior hires turned red part. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. How you doing? There's a little asterisk there that says, see junior high, middle school health instructor. Because you can say lots about this text. Lots has been said about this text. We're just going to zoom right on by it because you kind of get what the story is about, right? I think our Catholic friends call that family planning. That's what's going on here. So, or something. I'm not entirely sure. I've chose not to take my chances. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. You don't say, right? Like, okay, you don't do that. So now you got 2 dead. Now here's where the story gets really crazy and yet valuable. Judah, so remember Judah, the greedy kind of for me kind of guy. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, many texts translate thought feared, and we all know what happens when you make fear-based decisions. For he feared he may die too, just like his brother. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Now, on one level, like, who can blame Judah? She married this guy, or this woman, he married this woman. 2 of them died, so she's a bit of a black widow. Now he's got 1 more, and he's going, nope, time out, I'm done. But culturally, what he does here is completely inexcusable. He takes a woman completely vulnerable, completely exposed, completely shamed. Twice she's been married, and twice her husband had died, and she has no kids to show for either marriage. What do you suppose her percentage of finding another husband are? The word is 0. And he sends her back completely vulnerable, completely exposed to her hometown. So this is like, hey, Dad, turns out you can't get a job with that degree. Can I live in your basement while I get another degree? Like, this is kind of one of those moments. She ends up back at home, living in her hometown, completely humiliated. And of course, she picks up that Judah has no intention of ever sending his 3rd son or sending for her 3rd son. But this woman has some moxie. And so she figures out that Judah's headed to town, figures out Judah's wife has died, so he's got some needs, finds out Judah's coming to town, and it's sheep shearing time. And so it's sheep shearing time, because I know, what do you do when you shear sheep? You party. The answer to the question is you party. Anytime in the text, because that's what you do, right? Like, any time in the text you read sheep shearing, just read party. Like New Year's Eve, Super Bowl, like this is like all bets are off, like anything goes kind of season. So Judah's coming to town, and she finds out that he's coming to town, and it's party time, and so probably inebriated, I don't know, we're assuming some things now. She gets out her Victoria's Secret catalog, she makes some orders, and she meets him at the city gate. And she doesn't recognize her, because they had an opposite dynamic there. She was veiled and all kinds of covered. And she goes like, hey, and he goes, uh-huh. And they have this exchange, and he says, okay, and he says, well, she says, what are you going to pay me? Which, of course, the answer is always a goat, right? I'll give you a goat. That's what she says. And so she says, where's the goat? And he said, I left it at the ranch. And so she says, okay, so I need some collateral. And she says, how about your car keys? And he gives her car keys. She actually gives him his staff, his seal, and his cord, which is the equivalent of like, here's my bank account number, my car keys, and my credit card. Like that's kind of what's going on here. They do their thing. They part ways because that's the way that goes. He goes back to town, sends his buddy back to this city to go pick up his car. And everyone's like, what do you mean temple prostitute? There's no temple prostitute in this town. He can kind of see like, oh, geez, this kind of feels like a sting operation. Maybe I'll go back underground and just kind of get a new car. And so he goes back to town. And then a few months later, he finds out that his daughter-in-law is pregnant. Now, he knows she's not married, and he's ticked. And he says, here's what we need to do with Tamar. Bring her out and burn her alive. The worst possible punishment. And as Tamar's being brought out, this is like, you ever wonder Tamar is awesome. So as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law, I'm pregnant by the man who owns these. And she added, Haker nah. The word there is recognize. She says, go see Judah for me, will you? And when you see him, just hold out his staff and his cord and his seal and say to him, Haker nah. Recognize this. See what she did there? She just completely flipped. She says the same thing to Judah that Judah said to his dad 20 years ago. And he does a 180. The whole script flips on Judah. Look what happens next. Judah recognized them and said, she's more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. Parenthetically, his life changed dramatically at this moment. He brought her into his house. And you know something? Both of them show up in Jesus' genealogy. Now, question. Do you see anything in this text that throws Tamar under the bus? Do you see anything in here that says, that condemns her? Doesn't necessarily recommend it, but nothing condemning her. This is a story about justice. This is a story about resources and how we utilize them. This is a story about a woman who is completely vulnerable, completely exposed, had nothing, and a wealthy man who had means to do something about her situation and said no. It's a story about a man who went, no, this stuff's for me. And it's a reminder that one of the threads that weaves itself throughout every text, every narrative, every life in the Bible is this thread that I think we could just simply label who for. The heroes answer the question one way in the text. The villains always answer it another question. It's this question. In Genesis 1, it comes up. God creates people and all this stuff. But you notice that people in Genesis 1, they're given a responsibility to take care of and tend to the earth. It's not about them or for them. They're servants to creation. And they go, nah, we think we'll flip that script. And they miss an opportunity. In Genesis 12, God is bringing his story, trying to bring it back onto the rails. And he says to a guy named Abram, hey, Abram, you're going to have such a great house and a great job and healthy kids and a beautiful wife. Abram, you're going to have it all going on. But Abram, it's not for you. I'm going to bless you so that you'll be a blessing to others. Over and over again. Judah's story is a challenge to go, wait a minute. Not just what's your vocation, but who benefits from the profit of your vocation. I'm so grateful there's these two principles. And the guy who taught them to me, he was so intentional with it. In fact, I was 20 years old. I remember I was probably following Jesus for less than a year at the time, and this guy who was influential for me, he called me up and he's like, hey, Adam, someone, as a thank you, just gave me a $100 gift card to the Bible bookstore. This was in Billings. And he says, well, thank you for sharing with me your accolades. And he said, no, I understand that you really like to read, and I was just getting into the book thing and Bible studying and stuff. And he said, tell you what, I'd like to share some of it with you. Why don't you go to the Bible bookstore, pick out a book, leave it at the front, and I'm going to come by with my gift certificate tonight, and before I get myself my thing, I'll get you your thing. Like that's how intentional he was with this. Everything that comes into my realm is for me to share. It wasn't just paycheck, it was paycheck plus everything else. In fact, he had a boat, a riverboat, and he got the word out, which, by the way, if you think I'm trying to manipulate you to use your riverboat, when I go fishing, fish sunbathe. I'm no threat to them. I don't fish, so don't feel like I'm trying to manipulate you there, okay? So he had a riverboat, loved to fish. He also had lots of friends who he loved to serve, and it was just available. You just knew, if you're this guy's friend or he pours into you in any way, there's this boat, and you just call him and put it on the schedule, and you come and grab his boat. Well, one day he went to go use his boat, and it wasn't until he got it to the river that he realized that his two oars, there was only one left. And the other one, what he figured out was the second oar was a metal pipe with a piece of tin bale wired to the end of it, and he figured out that had become his other oar. Now, I don't do the riverboat thing. I didn't know this, but he's instantly he went, well, that's a problem, because if I drop that oar in the Yellowstone, it goes to the bottom, and now I'm up a creek, right? Josh is better at those. Because apparently you can't do the riverboat thing with one oar. So he went about his day, and you kind of can see where this is going. 20 minutes before it's over, he drops the metal pole, sinks to the bottom. He's now got one. He's on the opposite side of the Yellowstone that he needs to be on to take his boat out. He said he couldn't figure out how to steer the thing with one. Apparently that's hard. So you know how he got it over there? He jumped in the water and held onto the back of his riverboat, and like a kid with a kickboard, had to steer the thing over. He said there are people who were waiting to take or to put in or take out other boats. He got a standing ovation when he got to the shore. Now, he's telling me this, I'm going, this is exactly why you don't share things. And then he went, no, this is why I have a giving account. And the one thing I really want to get you to think about this morning, he's the only one that ever taught Teresa and I this. We did it from the day one, literally opening a second checking account. And every time something came in, paycheck, Christmas gift, whatever, and I was going to give some, like, first thing it does is it goes into this second account. Now, he's a tither. He's a give to the church first. He's a 10% at least guy. But his deal was, and then you do more than 10, and suddenly you have an account, and suddenly you're at work and you hear that your coworker who's a single mom needs new tires. Boom, you've got money for it. Or you have a boat that you want to share with your friends, but we all know, like if you lend someone your lawnmower, it comes back broken. Turns out you've got money to fix it. And so there's all these opportunities to do all this random stuff. I was talking to him recently. He said, Adam, I just about bought a 1971 Corvette. Well, that's cool, but he's not the 1971 Corvette guy. He's the Toyota Camry kind of guy. And I was like, what? Why? He said, I got all these marriages that I'm pouring into, all these people that I'm serving. And he said, I'm always telling them, take your wife, take your husband out on a date. He said, I decided I'm going to buy a Corvette so that I can say to these guys, I know you're not going to listen to me and take your wife to dinner, but if you take my Corvette, you can take her to dinner. Serious, like he's doing this. And you go like, who buys a Corvette so their friends can take their friends to dinner? A guy who for 30 years, probably more, has went like, okay, every time something comes in, transfer, different account, and he's carrying some extra. And the reason he's able to do that, which is the second thing, and this, I challenge you to think of the last time someone challenged you to do this. The second thing that he challenged me to do at 20 years old while I was still poor and going to college is go ahead, number 2, was just, his deal was, Adam, what if you annually decrease the percentage of your income that you live on? He's the first and only person who ever looked at me and said, Adam, what if by the time you were 50 years old, you only lived on 50% of your income? What if 50% of it, like you decide how much you're going to save in retirement and all that stuff. What if suddenly you're given 30% into this checking account? And yeah, you're giving to the church and you're doing that whole thing, and you know what happens? Then suddenly you're going, wait a minute, if I can serve people by buying a Corvette, I'll do that. What if you were to embrace this? You know, there's some studies, David and Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell's book, Tom Rath, in his book, Fully Charged. They talk scientifically about how household income is tied to overall happiness. Did you know, and this isn't Christians, this isn't like church guys asking for your money. This is like people who aren't at church talking about people's health and happiness and how all that translates. Did you know that statistically there is zero quality of life increase when your household income goes above $75,000? In other words, there's no corresponding relationship between your household income and your happiness north of $75,000. And in fact, if you read David and Goliath, you'll see the falling off point is steep. It breaks the other way very rapidly. Tom Rath points out that if you dig into the research even further, it's negligible between $40,000 a year and $75,000. Now, you watch the Super Bowl, and what it's there to tell you is you need every penny you can make. But what if the text is onto something here? And what if we understood that we're not just here to make money, and it's not that our standard of living can't go up, but what if you just made a decision to go, wait a minute, every time my standard of living goes up, so does my generosity, so does my giving. And can you imagine the fun of saying to this single mom that you work with who has blony skin tires, like, oh, just go get some tires. And can you imagine what happens when you're not the martyr who suddenly can't feed your kids, you're just like, oh yeah, I've got a budget for that. Can you imagine how much fun that is? See, the question that I guess I'm trying to pose to you is, what if you didn't just think in terms of your hands and your skills and your tools? And those are important. What if you leverage some of your income? I love the way the Apostle Paul said this in Ephesians 4, because he's just so blunt, and it reminds me that people who follow Jesus are of a certain makeup that I can fit in with them. In Ephesians 4, he says, Anyone who's been stealing must steal no longer. So this kind of shows the type of guys that are hanging out with Paul. So if you're going to follow Jesus, you better quit stealing. And then he says, but you must work, doing something useful with your own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. What if this isn't just psychology to how to grow the budget of a church? What if it's true that the money you give is oftentimes far more satisfying? And what if you didn't just have ownership in every Easter egg hunt and every cup of coffee, but what if you also had your own categorical budget that you could serve people with and you could respond to spontaneous need with? And what if by the time you're 60 years old, what if you're living on 40% of your income and generous beyond explanation? You know, for Judah, the great news is this was a turning point in his story. Some theologians say that what Tamar did was hold a mirror up in front of him and just begged him to ask the question, do you see who you've become? Do you see what you're about? Like, you say you don't have enough, and if someone would have told you when you were 17 you're going to make this much, they would have said you're a phony. Do you see that it's become about you? And the great news is Judah can encourage all of us, and that is you've got your whole life to receive God's grace. Because Judah, who the majority of his story was about him, it turned. You go back and read Joseph's story this week in your chair time. You'll see that Judah played a vital role in Joseph's story, because this guy who was all about self suddenly became about something much bigger than self. Go to the book of Revelation and you'll find Jesus referred to as the Lion of Judah. His story ends quite remarkably. Listen, if you're a student here this morning, middle school, high school, as embarrassed as you are, and I know you're going to look at your feet when you leave, maybe. My prayer literally, and I don't always do this to be honest with you, my prayer has been that there would be a seed planted in your heart, and that when you get out of college, when you get that job, that you would commit then to being the kind of person by the time you're 40 years old, 10%, you're going, 10%. I'm up to 21, because you've just decided that as standard of living increases, so will your giving. Some of you, you're in this spot where you realize that you've taken the bait, and every time income's gone up, so has quality of life, and you feel this pressure like, I can't give, how would I give? And I guess my prayer for you is that you'll go back to the drawing board, take a hard look at Judah's story, and decide for who. Some of you are doing this. I think I never want Narrate or church in general to ever be this like, here's what you're doing wrong, now go do it right. Some of you are doing this. It's why we exist as a church. And it's why several people in your life have been blessed financially and otherwise. My hope for you is that this morning reinvigorates that, because you look at what you're not doing compared to your friends, and you know, if I wasn't doing that thing, I'd be doing all that and more. My hope is that this would reinvigorate your commitment to God's kingdom. Some of you are in this new season, and you are kind of reinventing costs and finances. Can you imagine what would happen if you just trusted that God's generosity really is the best approach? I'd like to pray for you, and I'm going to give you a chance to think through music. God, Lord, thanks for the amount of trust that you've extended our way and the amount of grace. Thanks, Jesus, for the cross, that we don't give our way into relationship with you, and we don't earn it. We don't tithe it. We don't Corvette it. We receive it from you. And then as it gets deeper and deeper into our being, we extend it back out. God, I pray that there would be some fun, inspiring conversations between parents and their kids and couples as they explore some things maybe they've never thought about, of just creating this whole separate budget, whole separate account. And then the couples would begin to talk about, okay, so at 60, what percentage do we want to be living on? And how do we get there? God, for our veterans who, like, it's why we exist, because of their obedience, I pray that the satisfaction that comes from obedience would be palpable for them this morning. that they'd be renewed in their energy to give more, not just financially, but of themselves than makes mathematical and emotional sense. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.